Sales is so misunderstood. Everybody thinks it's a specific way. I wanted to show like a different perspective of sales, like how you can actually like truly be yourself and incorporate your values without feeling like you're fake, right? And it's harder to do actually in real life because we all feel like there's like an architect for sales, right? We all feel like it has to be done by like a playbook, or all the examples of bestsellers, you know, in Silicon Valley are like older white men, right? So it's like, how do you envision yourself in that position when you don't behave in the same way, right? And so that's like a lot of what I do with my coaching is like, how do you be yourself? How do you talk like a human? Because for some reason, when you start selling, you start talking not like yourself. You know, you become very unnatural, right? But people are looking for idiosyncrasies. They're looking for like human connection, but people forget that, right? So anyways, I could go on and on, but so there's a lot of things founders do that still surprise me today. Whenever I listen to a call, you know, when you see how much percentage of time you talk, a lot of founders and like salespeople too will talk like 75, 80% of the call. It's like mind blowing.
Try to sell something.
Yeah. Even if you're speaking like 70% or 65%, that's a lot of talking, right? And oftentimes they're talking, sometimes I'll like time the monologues. Sometimes people talk for 5 minutes straight and they're talking to another person. So like imagine if I were talking 5 minutes straight to you without a pause, you know, like it's very unnatural way to communicate. But for some reason, when people think of sales, they're like, I have to talk about my product and I don't have time. So I need to show everything. Yeah. You're nervous. Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Try to add more.
Yes. You know, it's interesting too, like everybody runs out of time at the end of calls too. And so like there's like 3 minutes left and clearly like they're either sold or not sold. You know, even within 5 or 10 minutes, you know if somebody you're talking to is excited, right? But for some reason, in the last 3 to 4 minutes, a lot of founders will be like, can I show you one more thing? Like, sorry, I didn't show you one more thing. Because the mindset is like, oh my gosh, they're not interested. So maybe I need to show 5 more things, you know? Because like, oh, I forgot this thing. But like what people don't realize is like showing even like 50% of your product on the first call isn't effective in sales, right? Like it's only effective to show like a portion of your product and then align with the other person, listen to them about their problem so that you can actually connect the dots between what you believe in and what their problems are, right? But a lot of people are so like feature focused, they get stuck in like the technical details. You learn sales if you're selling like an underdog concept and you're trying to change people's perception as to why you are the winner compared to like Cisco, right? Or like Google, right? And I think that takes a lot of like listening and a lot of like thinking about what you're saying, right? So I used to obsess over, because you know, like I think maybe I talked about this in the EO interview, but when I grew up in Michigan, I was like one of the only Asian kids going to school. And so like I would get on the school bus and they would make fun of my eyes. They'd be like, oh, you're Chinese, your eyes are so small, you know, but they're like, you know, 8-year-old kids, right? But that memory was so traumatic for me because, you know, I'm walking down the school bus and, you know, I didn't like, you know, I wanted like a bologna sandwich, not kimbap, you know, like I wanted to be all American. And so it actually like made me practice English a lot at home, like by myself. So I'd look in front of the mirror and I would like speak English obsessively, like watch American movies and think about the tonality and the phrasing. And so because of that, I coach a lot of like founders now, even who are like native English speakers. They ask me like, how do you say this, right? So it's kind of like, it's really interesting. It's ironic, right? That I'm teaching like English speakers how to speak English, but it's such a core part of the sales process. But I think everybody can learn it, you know, even native Korean speakers, because like there's also things that I do to slow down the conversation. So I call these like bridge phrases, because like when I was young, I had to buy myself time to speak in like class or in any public forum. So I've taught like my founders to say similar things. So if you don't understand something, you have to say, hey, can we go back to that point? Because I don't know that I fully understood what you were saying, but it seems very important to you. So that is like actually a very, very highly nuanced English phrase, right? But the short version of it is, I don't understand what you said. You know what I'm saying? But if you're like, hey, it seems really important to you, and like, I just want to make sure I clearly understand that part of the problem, suddenly you go from like, I don't understand this to, wow, he's like very highly communicative and very empathetic, right? Or sometimes I'll say like, let me just think out loud here for a second with you. People appreciate that, right? Because then all of a sudden they're like, wow, he's throwing the script away and he's actually being vulnerable, because if you're thinking out loud, you might say something incorrectly, right? But in enterprise sales, people judge you on that. They're like, how do you think, not what does your product do? Especially for startups, because your product isn't going to be mature in the first few years. So it's not just your product that people are buying. It's like, how do you think, right? And what do you believe in? And I think people forget that. You know, like a lot of pitch decks, I see a lot of like, oh, we do all of this, right? This is like everything we do. And the truth of the matter is, like, enterprise organizations don't want you to do everything, right, as a startup, because then you're probably not going to be good at one thing. Guess what is the number one question everybody asks on sales calls? So the number one question, you might laugh, is any questions. They ask that, and you know why?
All the way.
Yeah. That's the number one question. Anytime I listen to a call, I know I'm going to hear that question, sometimes 10, 20, 30 times.
Right.
And why do we ask that question as human beings? It's because we feel like we're talking too much. So it's like, you talk, and it's like, I'm going to stop there for a second. Any questions? And then usually any questions, people are like, no. Or if they ask a question, it's not something you want them to ask. You know, then they ask, and you're like, oh my gosh, why do I have to objection handle right now, right? So like the trick in sales is to ask questions that are intentional and strategic, right? So like a better question would be, hey, like, Raleigh, you asked about this in the beginning of the call, and you said this was actually a big problem. Do you feel like this is a good way to solve for it? You know, like, that is way different, because then you have to actually answer that. You have to think. But whenever we ask any questions, the prospect doesn't have to think. So that's the other thing in sales. You want like an equal dynamic, you know, and if you're the one talking and answering the questions, you're not getting what you need out of that deal, right? And to your point, like budget, like if people ask that, that would be great, but people get scared of asking that, right? They're like, oh, I don't want to talk about pricing for the first call. Then it's like, okay, well, what if you're wasting your time, right? And like, so anyways, like, so it's interesting to see those patterns. Sometimes there's issues that pop up, right? You can just tell when somebody's not paying attention. And power move, right, is to be like, hey, listen, like, it doesn't seem like, is there an emergency going on? Because I hear a lot of typing in the background and you haven't asked any questions. And then we've been 10 minutes into the call. Because if you have something to address, we could reschedule this call, right? Because the last thing I want to do is talk about something that's not a priority for you. You know, like, it sounds kind of scary to say that, right? Because you're basically saying like, don't waste my time. But people respect that if you say it in the right way, right? Because it's like, hey, I want to make sure your time is well spent. So I find this kind of like two-way dialogue. How do you do it? How do you call out the elephant in the room, like, to be very important in sales? And it's the hardest thing for people to do, you know, because it's scary, right? So another thing founders don't do in the beginning of calls is they never, like, a lot of founders don't talk about themselves. I don't know if you had this thought too, or like, whenever I'm like, hey, like, show me a call or pitch me the product, they just go into the product, like you said. So my advice always is like, focus on your experience and your thoughts and yourself first, right?
Why is it then? Why is it?
Because so like, I interviewed a bunch of my enterprise customers, and because I sold at startups that weren't supposed to win in enterprise, right? And a lot of what they said was, it was the company's way of thinking, the founder's way of thinking that sold them, right? It's like, not, the product obviously was great, but they agreed with how the founder viewed the world. And a lot of enterprise organizations will bet on that mindset. in addition to the product. So I think like the best way to not get product focused or not get too product focused is to start with something you're the most confident in, which should be yourself, right? And how you think, like how does your mind think, right? And so I think like that, like I coach a lot of founders to say things like, you know, I experienced this and I thought it was really interesting that there's no solution for this, right? Or like when I was doing XYZ, I obsessed over this particular, you know, line of code for like 50 hours. And I realized I couldn't solve the problem, but then one day it just hit me that the answer was B. You know what I'm saying? Like it's all like stuff that you've experienced showing that, I think, like connects people, because then they're like, oh wow, this person has actually thought about this problem for a long time. And at that point, by the way, sometimes like the product becomes very small, right? Because then the person's like, oh, I want to talk to this person because they've thought about the problem I'm experiencing. I don't even know if they have a product to help me, but I just want to talk to them because they've learned a lot. So I think maybe like that's my that is my advice. Like I was working with a client and he was at Meta, Snap. I think he was at TikTok too, actually. Engineer, like top of the line engineer. And I was like, okay, like send me a call. In the call, he never talked about his experience or what he did. And I was like, you like worked on the Meta ads product and you told me when I like asked you questions, you had this and this problem. And because of that, you built this product, but you didn't even talk about that origin story. And I think a lot of Koreans don't know how to talk about themselves, right? The Korean founders. I'm thinking because, yeah, in the US, I think culturally with like enterprises, at least that, you know, I've been selling into, they want to take a bet on an outlier, but it has to be a strategic bet, right? Like it can't be like 100% risk, but I think in the US at least, decision makers like the thought about taking risks. And so the person and how they think is really important because they know the product isn't where it should be in 5 to 10 years, right? So I think like the focus on the individual like perspectives and values like plays out like in a pretty big way in enterprise sales cycles. The other thing too is like the fact of the matter is like unfortunately there's a lot of people with great resumes who aren't great founders or who aren't great like professionals, right? So like the pattern matching kind of doesn't work as well in my opinion, right? Like just because you went to MIT and you worked at Google or NVIDIA, it's not a guarantee you're going to succeed as a founder. And so I think like it's even more important to be like, okay, this is my background, but I want to talk about the experience that I had thinking through the problem, right? It's why, like, if you think about it, like the most successful companies have really great content marketing, right? Because over the period of like months to years, these companies tell you how they think through their content, right? They're not really like the great content pieces aren't really talking to you about here's my product. They're like, here's what we think about the world, right? The world is changing. Why are we relying on 1990 software for this? You know, like it's interesting. I was like studying databases because there's a client of mine who has a financial transactions database. And you know, it's really interesting that Postgres, you know when it was invented? Okay, so I just looked it up today. And so Postgres was invented in 1986. 1986, that was the year I was born. So it's 39-year-old technology, but a lot of enterprises rely on Postgres, right? And Postgres is great, has a lot of great applications, but think about the hardware from 1986, right? We had these big mainframes, right? And now like chips are getting a lot more efficient, right? So if a database was designed for hardware in the 80s, how do you think that's playing out today, right? For like things like financial transactions, right? So I think that's really interesting. And so if a founder were to say that, let's say, they don't like, you might not even know what the product does, right? But all of a sudden you're like, oh wow, this is like an interesting framing of the world. And you want to talk to that person more, hopefully, right? And it's like, okay, so now that we know that that doesn't work, that Postgres has its limitations, what is a potential solution? Where here's how I thought about it, right? And that like draws people in. And so I think these like, I know I talk a lot about phrasing, but it is the key to human connection and to closing deals, right? And most salespeople, I think, over-index on the script and the product, and then they lose like C-level execs, right? Because like executives want to hear the story, not the product, right? So, and the other thing I learned there was in sales, another concept is you have to say no more than you say yes, which is like you have to say no more than you say yes.
Even when you sell.
When you sell, yeah, because I'll just give Dropbox as an example and Slack too. In enterprise deal cycles, you get a lot of questions, right? And you think the right answer is to say yes to everything, to say, yes, we can do that. Yes, we can do that. Yes, we can do that. But what happens is if you do that, you get away from the core of why a company is buying you, right? And also like the expectations are wrong, right? And so it's funny, when I was talking to my champion at NBC, we were like joking, we were like, isn't it funny how many times we had to say no to people at NBC? Like, no, we don't have encryption key management. No, you can't password protect your links. Is that gonna be a problem? Because if it is, we should know that now, right? But remember, the core reason why you all are talking to us is because of this broader vision we're building. So, and there's an art, right? Because you can't say no all the time either, but there's moments in deal cycles where you have to say no, but, right? Is that a problem? How important is that to you? And here's why we're not doing that, by the way. And it goes back to actually the like way of thinking. And people really appreciate that, right? When you get on a call and you're like, hey, I know you think you really need this, but let me tell you why we decided not to build it. It's because the way we think you should solve it is this way. Does it work? And then a lot of times people come back and they're like, you know what? That was a key moment in the deal. You changed how I think about solving a problem. And because of that, I trust you, right? Because another problem that comes up a year from now, 6 months from now, I feel like we can go through the same like thinking out loud exercise, right? And you know what's interesting is like, if you have like, let's say 3 or 4 really strong champions and you're trying to sell like to Capital One, let's say, big company, right? 100,000 plus employees. There are more detractors in a deal than there are champions or protractors, right? Or proponents, sorry, I should say. That is very common. So you need, when you're selling, you need to understand, is the prospect a good seller internally? You know, that's also what I was thinking. Like when I was working with Lenny Bloom at NBC, right, I was testing him too, because he was making me give him access to my C-suite, right? And then I was like, okay, can Lenny get the CISO to the table? Can Lenny get the CIO to the table? Do people listen to Lenny or do people ignore Lenny, right? And so in every deal, I'm always judging the prospect too. And I think we need to do that as salespeople more. It's not you selling them, they need to sell you, because in a startup, your time is very limited, right? So if you're spending time with somebody who's not a good internal seller, good luck, right? And there's a lot of like, unfortunately, there's a lot of VPs, SVPs, and even C-level executives who are not powerful, you know, and there's a lot of senior directors who are more powerful than SVP. And so like kind of, it goes back to the human dynamic, understanding like, hey, is this person going to be a good vehicle for my pitch is really important, because there's more hours spent in internal meetings than there are external. So I always used to think about that too. And I'd always ask like my decision makers, hey, what happened in that meeting? It seemed like your CIO was really like upset. Is he just having a bad day, or does he not like us? You know, like you said like this security officer was very, you know, against us. How should we prepare for that meeting then? Like how can I help you like to diffuse their concerns, right? And so there's all this like multi-stakeholder stuff, but I spent a lot of my sales career actually avoiding people, I think. The truth of the matter is I'm not even comfortable now. I still get nervous, you know, because I'm like, because no call is the same. So I still like, I'm like, okay, this might be the call where I failed. You know, this might be the call where I really embarrassed myself, right? So I still have that imposter syndrome, I think. So the way actually like I never go into a call without studying the people on the call, actually. I look up all their LinkedIn profiles, I use ChatGPT, Google search, I read about the company, and I spend probably at least 30 minutes just absorbing the company. And even if I don't use all the information, I suddenly feel more comfortable because I can know who they are, right, to some extent. And so I do some amount of preparation, but then a lot of, and then like the whole nerves part, it doesn't go away until I'm like 5 or 6 minutes into the call. I think the best way to probe is like to listen and use the prospect's words in your question, right? So like I have this concept called breadcrumbs where, you know, like if you drop a breadcrumb, you're gonna pick it up. So I think the best way to probe is, because if you have a list of questions you wanna ask, it's gonna feel very irrelevant to the buyer, right? But let's say I start the meeting and I say, you know, like just to first start off, let's do a quick round of intros. And then the first question I want to ask is like, what was interesting to you about our company to even like warrant this time, right? And they'll start talking, and then you have to listen. And then based off of what they say, you have to ask the question, right? And 100% of the time, people will say something, you can ask a question, but you need to train yourself to understand. You need to train yourself to think quickly enough to take what they're saying and then ask a question back, right? Well, like I had a big problem because like our financial database is like, you know, not working really well right now. Okay, what's not working really well about it? You know, it sounds very basic, but like, can you dive into that a little bit more? Okay, great. What are you using for your database? Like, what's your infrastructure look like? They answer. And then you're like, oh, that's interesting. And out of curiosity, like, how long have you been looking at this problem? You know, it's like kind of like you keep going down that path. And so I think probing, like the best sellers probe in real time and are able to kind of like continue the discussion without it feeling like it's like a list of questions, right? Yeah, and there's like phrasing hacks too. You know, sometimes if I feel like I want to shift, because you can't always just follow the breadcrumbs, then I'll be like, by the way, and I want to get back to what you said, but one thing I forgot to ask you is, you know, it sounds very natural, right? But it's actually like, it's different. So like, if I say that, like one thing I forgot to ask you is like, is there a budget for something like this out of curiosity? Like, is this already a line item somewhere, or do you have to create budget, right? And that's very different from you saying, is there budget for something like this? Two same questions, very different feeling, right? Because the first part, you've shown that you are empathetically shifting the discussion and that you are idiosyncratic as a human. The second one feels like, oh, like, of course you're gonna ask that because that's your job as a salesperson, right? So these things are like, I think really, and sometimes I'll also, the reason why I looked at LinkedIn profiles is sometimes I will mention something in that profile, especially in the beginning of the call, you know, like, I don't like to ask like, how's the weather, or where are you from, or like, how many kids do you have? Because everybody asks that, right? But if you start with, by the way, I noticed that you're in South Africa, and like your introduction in your LinkedIn profile really spoke to me. Very different, right? Because then they're like, wow, like this guy read that, you know, or like, oh, I listened to a podcast episode that you were on, and what really was interesting is this part. Suddenly you're like in a league of your own, right? Because you've taken the time to invest in that person, whereas seller B, who's asking about the weather, is lazy, right? So everything is intentional, and I think that's where the preparation is like, that stuff you can like, I think you can learn to do and have it be native to how you operate, but it makes sometimes all the difference in my opinion, because it shows people how you are going to show up, right? There's another thing that I'll mention, because I talk a lot about phraseology. It's not all about phraseology, but when I was closing News Corp at Dropbox, and also the NASDAQ, a principal technologist said this, he actually judges sellers on like how fast they get back response in email. So if you feel like you know sales well, like for example, you've closed 5 to 10 deals and the shape of the deal is similar, right? You're like, okay, they come in with this problem, I talk to them, then I show them a demo, and then they take 3 weeks to make a decision, and then the deal closes. And our average deal size for those 10 deals is like $50,000 a year. Let's say that is like the state you're in. Then I would hire a salesperson, right? Because you can't continue to go down that pace by yourself. If you're like, oh, like, I don't know if this product is gonna be able to sell in enterprise, and you haven't gone through that sales process yourself, then I would say hire the tech person, because you need to learn how to do the sales directly, because salespeople are not great at finding product market fit, right? Salespeople are great at scaling product market fit, right? But I find a lot of founders hire salespeople and leaders and expect them to figure it out. But it's just wishful thinking, right? And there's no magic number, right? It could be 5, it could be 10. People are like, oh, you need to get to 1 million. I don't believe that. You could get to 300,000 and have a repeatable process, right? And you could be at 2 million and have like a non-repeatable process if you sold an enterprise deal and that is going to churn in a year, right? So it's like more like, do you feel like there is a pattern where you can like say, hey, okay, now take this and run with it, right? It's not to say it's a perfect sales process, but you need to like understand that the shape of the sales story is there, right? I feel similar, like I get goosebumps when I feel like founders, like when you say, hey, like you actually impacted me, right? Or, hey, you changed the way I look at sales. So like, that's when I think I realized like, okay, like I love the coaching because I like changing how people think, And like, it's really powerful to think that they could have gone this way, but they went this way because of something you said or something you showed them.